Welcome everyone, session 13.
Here we go. First of all, welcome to spring. Spring has sprung.
That's true.
And we're ready for it.
Yes, last night at 8-ish was the
8:06 Pacific time. All right, we're on letter number 18, I believe. And it's a very long letter, but chock full of information and interesting tidbits, both of historical events and teachings. We're getting some real teachings now. So we left off talking about Stainton Moses. He was one of the potential individuals that the hierarchy had been looking at as someone who could do something similar to what HPB was doing. Now, keep in mind that the events that we were talking about, where he was being tested, this was 8 years previously. So while HPB and Olcott were still in New York, in fact, right about the time that they met, we never talked about how HPB and Olcott met.
That's true. That's true.
Very quickly, Olcott was an attorney, a tax attorney in New York City, and he had been interested in the spiritualist movement for quite a while, but he hadn't thought about it in a long time. So one day, all of a sudden, it came to him while he was sitting at his desk, let me go see what these spiritualists are up to. So he went downstairs, went out on the street and bought one of their newspapers.
The spiritualist movement had a newspaper?
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
They had their own newspaper, more than one. But I believe what he bought was the Banner of Light. Anyway,
the Banner of Light?
Banner of Light.
Okay.
So he took it back and read it, and he got fired up again about spiritualism. He decided, being an investigator, because he had been hired by the U.S. government to do investigations after the Civil War for corruption in the Army. He had training as an investigator.
And wasn't he involved in the Lincoln assassination?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
That was also part of his duties, was to investigate the Lincoln assassination. Mm-hmm. So he took it upon himself to investigate the spiritualists and see whether or not there was actually something to it. So he started going to seances and then writing articles which were published in the local newspapers in New York City. And he became quite well known for these investigative articles. So he read about a couple of men in Vermont who were natural mediums. They were farmers, two brothers, the Eddy brothers. And so he decided he was going to go to Vermont and investigate this phenomenon that was going on, at their farm. So he went to visit them at their farm because they would have people actually come and stay there. They had enough extra rooms that they would offer room and board for a price. And so he spent, I don't know how much time there, but he went to see what was going on. And one of the first people he saw there was HPB.
And she was doing the same thing, investigating?
Yes, in a sense. So what the Mahatmas had in mind early on was these spiritualists were natural, not seers, they were natural psychics. They were easily impressed. They could receive impressions from other realms of life.
Mainly the astral realm.
Exactly. So they were hoping that maybe among them they could find some that were trainable.
The Mahatmas believed that since they were already psychic to a certain sense, that they might have potential as a chela.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So they had put their hopes on this, that it would work. In fact, HPB tried to do the same thing in Egypt at one time.
Let me ask, we mentioned spiritualists as if it's a proper noun. Was it an actual organization?
Oh, yes.
Okay, because in modern day kind of pop culture, we use the term very loosely. A spiritual person is someone who believes in spirit.
Well, you have to be careful because there is spiritual, there is spirituality.
Right.
But the spiritualist movement is completely different. Their main goal is communication with the dead.
Can we just expound upon that for a second? So there was an organization in the 1800s called the Spiritualist movement.
Yes.
Wow.
You can still find spiritualist churches today.
And that's not a general term. That's a specific term. It's an organization that's called the Spiritualist. Interesting.
Yes. Okay. And it is capital S, just like theosophy is a capital T.
Okay.
So,
well, the Theosophical Society is a capital T, but the word
theosophy, if you look in the Chicago Manual of Style, theosophy is capitalized.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Cool. Okay, good.
So spiritualist movement is a movement. It was huge in both England and in the USA.
Did they have a leader,
at the time?
Like a hierarchy? Or
they had not an organization like theosophy did, where they had a president, but they had people who had kind of risen through the ranks and were revered as leaders of the
organically.
movement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Organically, yes, exactly. Anyway, Olcott met HPB. He saw her there, and he immediately, this woman stood out from everyone else. And she was speaking in French to someone there, and she rolled a cigarette and was looking around for a match, and he walks over and says, "Permettez-moi, madame."
Very chivalrous.
Yes. Lit her cigarette for her.
Okay. So he spoke French a little bit too?
He spoke pretty good French.
Okay.
A lot of educated people did speak French in those days. Sinnett spoke very good French. Olcott spoke good French, but HPB spoke excellent French, really good French.
Having her upbringing in Russia.
Yes, exactly. It was very much emphasized in Russia. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning of their relationship. So back to Stainton Moses. He, not long after HPB met Olcott, that's when Stainton Moses heard about her. And he was being tested. So this was around 1873. And as we found out last time, he failed. He was tested by the dweller on the threshold, which is psychic forces of your own creation, basically coming back to test you, to test your resolve and to see whether you realize that there's nothing they can do to harm you. But he failed the test. So now when we're talking about Sinnett, they've already moved past this idea of training spiritualists to be their helpers. That had been attempted, that had failed. And it was, at the time, it was more than just KH that was involved in that. As we saw, Imperator, we don't know who Imperator is, but apparently it's not just an adept, it's someone very high in the ranks of the Mahatmas and above the level of a Mahatma. We'll find that out as we go along. So that's where we're at right now. And I'll have you continue with the letter here.
Let's continue. You say of Imperator, Imperator is certainly not his, Stainton Moses' astral soul, and assuredly also he is not from a lower world than our own, not an earthbound spirit. That's telling.
Mm-hmm.
Not an earthbound spirit, meaning there's no physical body.
Well, meaning that it's not a person who has died but is still in touch with the earth.
Okay. No one ever said he was anything of the kind. HPB never told you he was Stainton Moses' astral soul, but that what he often mistook for Imperator was his own higher self, his divine Atman, not Linga, Sharira, or astral soul, or the Kamarupa, the independent double again. Imperator cannot contradict himself. Imperator cannot be ignorant of the truth, so often misrepresented by Stainton Moses. Imperator cannot preach the occult sciences and then defend mediumship, not even in the highest form described by his pupil.
So there are three different interpretations of Imperator. Obviously, at one time, it was a very high member of the hierarchy that was...
So we're speaking of it as a title. Imperator is a title now.
Yes, and it was Stainton Moses who gave his spirit guide that title, but he was the one who determined who it was. At one point, it was this high spiritual being that was contacting him, and Stainton Moses called him Imperator. HPB said also at times it was Stainton Moses' own higher self, and he interpreted that as Imperator. So he's thinking all of these entities are Imperator, when in fact they're not all the same individual.
It would be worth mentioning now, since this is part of our teaching, that a lot of times to our viewers, a lot of times when many of us think that we're being communicated with by a special being, it is our own intuition. Is that not accurate?
Yes.
And we think it's some elevated being giving us a message.
Yes, so let's just emphasize that. Most people who get a message, it's the voice in the head. It's just, some random thought that popped into your own mind, or that someone in the neighborhood is thinking and it drifted over your way and you're like, oh my God, I got a message from a spirit. And it's easy to do that. So the other thing is, we more likely, if it's a valid spiritual message, it's from your own higher self. So don't automatically assume that it's some high individual who is inspiring you.
And to be clear, this is the chart on page 33 in our book, Ancient Wisdom. Thought forms exist in the realms of both the lower manas and the higher manas, lower mind and higher mind. Thought forms. Thought forms. And the thought forms that Terry's mentioning that might impinge upon our consciousness are usually in the lower mental realm. A strong thought from someone nearby can do that. That's how psychism and telepathy works, but intentional. These are not intentional. These are just kind of random. And that's why we don't place a lot of emphasis on these voices in the head, as you said.
In the lower realm of the mental planes, it's associated with astral or emotions.
Since the astral realm, I guess we'll do a B-roll of this, but the astral and the mental are once removed, they are also connected and they are interpenetrating. So
exactly.
Mental, in the Vedantic scheme of this chart that we derived our information from, the Manomaya Kosha is both combined. They don't separate the astral and the mental, but we do for a reason. But the Manomaya Kosha is the mental emotional aspect of us. So the thought forms that Terry's talking about do have usually a strong emotional component. Wow, I'm being communicated with. They chose me.
Yeah, they chose me. It's only in the higher mental realm that you can have confidence that it is truth and reliable. So, let's see, what was
so
the
Stainton
other?
Moses was calling his higher intuition, his intuition, Imperator, and he didn't realize it wasn't the same
Exactly.
thing.
And then at other times, it was just some random elemental. And he confused that and decided that was also Imperator. So he would get totally confused as to who was trying to inspire him. And to him, they were all Imperator and had the same level of reliability.
And we do the same thing if we are sensitive enough. We don't normally have the clarity. And also, I'll just say one more thing on that. It is extremely, to our viewers, it is, we believe, extremely rare that a voice in the head would be from an elevated master or from an enlightened being like the Mahatmas.
Or even one of their pupils.
Or even one of their pupils. Yeah.
It can happen, but yes, it would be very, very rare. And you're better off believing that hopefully it's at least your higher self. That is far more reasonable.
And developing that connection with our higher self is very important to do, and we should be receiving intuitions from our
and that's the purpose of meditation, is to learn to contact your higher self.
With a Ethernet cable, not a dial-up modem
Yes.
cable. Okay, back to the... I got that from him. Okay. Mediumship is abnormal. When in further development the abnormal has given way to the natural, the controls are shaken off and passive obedience is no longer required. Then the medium learns to use his will to exercise his own power and becomes an adept.
So
That's
a
cool.
medium cannot become an adept. You have to give up any pretense of communicating with dead spirits or anyone who is in existence on the astral plane. The masters do not work on the astral plane.
And we should emphasize that again to our viewers. The astral plane, it is relatively easy for some people to have consciousness there, to astral project or astral travel, as it's sometimes called. We don't place emphasis on anything that goes on in the astral plane for the most part. The process is one of development, and the neophyte has to go all the way to the end. We've heard that before many times. As long as he is subject to occasional trance, he cannot be an adept. Well, because when you're in a trance, you're not in conscious control.
Exactly.
And the adepts
you
are
don't
in
even know
100%.
what's going on.
Stainton Moses passes 2/3 of his life in trance. Intentionally?
I think what he means is he just lives in a kind of dream world
Okay.
and is out of touch with reality.
To your question of whether Imperator is a planetary spirit, which is a very highly elevated being, highly advanced being in the hierarchy, and also may a planetary spirit have been humanly incarnated, I will first say that there can be no planetary spirit that was not once material or what you call human. I love that he said that. That talks about our cycle of life.
Exactly.
I'm going to use the word God was a human.
Yes,
It had
exactly.
flesh, evolved. We're all going there. It's controversial. When our great Buddha, the patron of all the adepts, the reformer and the codifier of the occult system, first reached nirvana on earth, he became a planetary spirit. That is, his spirit could at one and the same time rove the interstellar spaces in full consciousness and continue at will on earth in his original and individual body.
Yeah.
What?
Mic drop. Yes. Exactly.
Oh.
He wasn't just an enlightened being. He was an extremely enlightened being.
That's a dual consciousness. He could operate fully in both at the same time. I want to do that.
Well, in a far distant future, you can.
For the divine self, he had so completely freed itself from matter that it could create at will an inner substitute for itself, and leaving it in the human form for days, weeks, sometimes years, in no way affected by the change, either the vital principle or the physical mind of its body. Wow. By the way, that is the highest form of adeptship man can hope for on our planet. Wow, this is amazing. But it is as rare as the Buddhas themselves. That's a plural, Buddhas themselves.
Oh, yes. There have been, I believe, 24 Buddhas.
With our planet, or?
I think.
Oh, okay. And that's a title to our viewers. That's a title, like Christ is a title.
Exactly.
It wasn't his name.
A position in the hierarchy or
Yes.
enlightenment.
But it is as rare as the Buddhas themselves, the last Kobilgan who reached it being Tsongkhapa, 14th century. Oh, I didn't know that. 14th century AD?
Yeah. He's the one who reformed Buddhism in Tibet. So
I have
1300s.
not heard of Tsongkhapa in the 14th century.
He's the one who instituted the Gelugpa sect of Buddhism.
No idea. We should do a class on that. For me. The reformer of esoteric as well as of vulgar Lamaism. And when he says vulgar, he means for the masses?
Right.
I mean, as much as the lamas are
exactly.
the masses. Okay. Many are those who, quote, break through the eggshell. Few who, once out, are able to exercise their nirira namastaka fully when completely out of the body.
Now, that's a term that I don't think exists anywhere else. I tried to look that up to see exactly what it means. And as far as I can tell, KH is the only person that ever has used it.
Nirira namastaka. Well, it sounds like it implies to something in the inner realms, of course, because it says when completely out of the body.
I'm guessing that it may be an esoteric term among the higher-ups in Buddhism, and that it's not a term that is used in the outer world.
It must refer to a higher faculty of consciousness?
Yeah, that's what it...
You know, that prefix near, we know that prefix from near bija samadhi, when we reach the highest levels of samadhi without seed, without anchoring our thought to something at all, without seed, near bija, near is without. And that's what it means, I would assume, just from process of deduction, when completely out of the body. So without the body, that's the near prefix. But what rira, I don't know what that is.
I don't know. Maybe we can
do the
discover that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Conscious life in spirit is as difficult for some natures as swimming is for some bodies. Huh. That's because we're rooted in the physical world. That makes sense. The planetary spirit of that kind, the Buddha-like, can pass at will into other bodies of more or less etherealized matter, inhabiting other regions of the universe.
So what he's saying here, for example, is that we humans can only be fully conscious in the physical body. We don't have the ability to be fully conscious without a brain. So one of their siddhis, powers, is that they can remain fully conscious outside of a physical body. And so that is something that we have to develop if we are going to be able to continue progressing in spiritual consciousness.
Again, daily meditation practice.
And purification.
Purification of thoughts and physical body. Learning to calm the randomness of the brain, of the emotions of the ego. That's what gets us on the path towards that.
Yes.
Wow. There are many other grades and orders, but there is no separate and eternally constituted order of planetary spirits.
It sounds like each one is kind of independent. That's how I take it, at least.
Each spirit?
Planetary spirit. Now, as I mentioned once before, it doesn't mean necessarily just one individual. It can be several individuals working as a team, as a unit. So that's part of why we have the concept of the Trinity, for example.
There are many other grades and orders, but there is no separate and eternally constituted order of planetary spirits. But there is a hierarchy.
They communicate. There is a hierarchy of
Development or leadership,
of elevation of consciousness and wisdom, but apparently they don't operate the same way as like the spiritual hierarchy of our own planet or solar system.
Oh, so we're not talking about. Okay, I thought we were talking about our planet.
Not necessarily. I think he's talking about in general. I believe,
because the solar system is one level, then the galaxy, and then the galactic chain.
Right.
And there's so many.
So these planetary spirits, as he says, can roam interstellar space, but there doesn't seem to be an organization where they all. It's almost like each one is an independent investigator or researcher.
Oh my goodness. Whether Imperator is a planetary, embodied or disembodied, whether he is an adept in flesh or out of it, I am not at liberty to say. If he himself chooses to be silent on that subject, Stainton Moses has no right to ask me. Why should he be, quote, anxiously awaiting my reply, since he knows all about Imperator?
He's being facetious because Stainton Moses is just sure he knows everything, but he's horribly confused.
Can we clarify one thing here? So the process that you mentioned in the introduction for this video, the process of Stainton Moses communicating, or Imperator communicating with Stainton Moses and vice versa, was another test that the hierarchy, if Imperator is part of our hierarchy, conducted prior to the Theosophical Society, prior to all of the letters, Mahatma Letters.
Yes.
So they did another test, and we've said many times to our viewers that they took a huge risk, and KH was barely even permitted to do this test in the first place. But now we're learning that a higher being was conducting his own test prior to all this.
Right. And KH probably knows who that individual is, but he says, I have no right. If Imperator wants to advise him of who he is, that's fine, but it's not up to me to divulge that.
This is really worth emphasizing, though, because HPB was so hard to find. They searched for hundreds of years, but they had Stainton Moses around the same time as well.
Later, because HPB was recruited in 1851. Yeah, I believe 1851.
Oh, so the communication with Stainton Moses was a little bit after that.
This is 1873.
But prior to the formation of the society, but HPB was already deeply in communication for years and years. Wow. This isn't emphasized anywhere, this communication between Stainton Moses and this very high being.
No, it's not. That's why it's interesting, because even though there are many, many people who have studied deeply these letters, I've never seen that emphasized before.
I mean, this probably gets lost in the thousands of other claimed communications or channelers, people like Sai Baba and other people who are famous and are channeling every day. This would get lost in the popularity of all the other sensationalized channelers.
And I think KH kind of intentionally throws in a lot of information because it gets people off on sidetracks. So
like
you have to be really focused and be able to pick out little details like this and assemble them from various sources and put them together before you can figure out some of these things.
That's very true. And you've been doing this for years. That's why it's...
All right, this next section here, he's going to mention something that happened while he was in Europe attending university, and a discussion he had with a professor at the university. So go ahead and read that.
I may answer you with what I said to G.H. Fechner, Gustav Theodor Fechner, 1801 to 1887. One day when he wanted to know the Hindu view on something he had written. Quote, "You are right. Every diamond, every crystal, every plant and star has its own individual soul."
So this is KH speaking to the professor, because the professor had written things about everything in life having consciousness. He was ahead of his time in his thinking.
Wow.
And he wanted to know, because he had this Hindu student in front of him, what the Hindus thought about that. And so he answered him. Fechner was interesting. KH got his middle initial wrong, but that's all right. He was a scientist, very well respected, but he had very distinct ideas. He was also very interested in practical psychology. He wanted to find out how to combine knowledge of human psychology with science, and he had the vision that there was something more than the scientists were seeing.
Well, he sounds like a theosophist.
Exactly.
I wonder where
a natural one.
Natural, right. I wonder where he got the idea that every diamond, everything has a soul. I mean, he must have been intuiting this.
Exactly.
I'll read that again, because this speaks to our cycle of the soul's evolution, where everything is conscious. So KH would say to him, "You are right. Every diamond, every crystal, every plant and star has its own individual soul, as well as man and animal. And there's a hierarchy of souls from the lowest forms of matter up to the world soul." We haven't heard him call it that specific before. "But you are mistaken when adding to the above the assurance that the spirits of the departed hold direct psychic communication with souls that are still connected with the human body, for they do not."
So apparently he did believe in the spiritualist concept that one could communicate with dead spirits. He said, everything else you write about is correct, but your idea that you can communicate with dead individuals is not.
KH is being very decisive. They do not. There is a vague consciousness, though, in the astral realm that the spiritualists do contact.
Yes, they do. And it is the remnants of that person's astral and etheric body. Yes, when a physical body dies, you still have something there. And it decomposes. As they move, the person who dies, as they move through the different realms, they shed the etheric body and the astral body, but it takes time. They disintegrate slowly.
And the astral body has a consciousness.
Yes.
But it's not full consciousness.
Not at all. And so the psychics can communicate with these shells. It's a shell of a person, the remainder, that is animated by elementals, nature spirits. And they love to dress up in these shells and communicate with people who think that they are people who have died.
KH is just cutting all the BS. So,
yes,
sorry.
Exactly.
And he's saying no. He's saying no. You do not communicate. This departed souls do not communicate with.
You may believe it, but you're mistaken.
That's very interesting. I love how direct he is. The relative position of the inhabited worlds in our solar system. Wow, worlds. The relative position of the inhabited worlds
in
our solar system.
Yes,
this is important, huh? Would alone preclude such a possibility.
Now,
that's interesting.
Let's point out here, when he's talking about inhabited worlds, that doesn't mean that there are humans on other planets, not in physical form. There may be humans in astral form, in higher realms of consciousness, but not necessarily in physical human form, or animal or otherwise.
And that's a whole series of classes on its own there. However, ethereal and purified of gross matter they may be, the pure spirits are still subject to the physical and universal laws of matter. They cannot, even if they wanted to, span the abyss that separates their worlds from ours, Well, it is interesting that he says that they're subject to the physical laws of matter, because in the astral and other realms, and even in the etheric realm, the same laws of matter don't apply, like distance and time.
They have their own laws that do apply.
They have their own laws. They have their own laws. Okay. They can be visited in spirit. Okay, there you go. Their spirit cannot descend and reach us. We have to elevate ourselves.
So, he'll talk later about the actual after-death state, Bardo, the period between the death of a physical body and that individual's next incarnation. He will give us a lot more information about that. But what we find out is that theoretically you can communicate with your deceased relative or friend, but only at a high level. And it would be your higher self communicating with their higher self. But he also emphasizes that still should not be done because it isn't useful to that individual.
It's more selfish for us.
It's selfish, exactly.
The level of the higher mind, higher manas, this is the level of the soul, of the higher self, and this is the part of us. So from this level up, the lower quaternary dissolves when we die, and there is a consciousness that remains forever. That's this level and above. And if we can raise our consciousness to that level, that's what Terry's referring to.
So the whole point of meditation is to get in communication with your own higher self. That opens up everything. That's the key.
The book was just a tentative effort to divert the attention of the spiritualists from their preconceptions to the true state of things.
So,
really?
So this is a few years after they had experimented with Stainton Moses, thinking that spiritualists were possibly a source for people to help in the theosophical movement. But it was a big failure. And so they had decided to move on from that. But they wanted to make clear that was not going to be a method to switch over. So at one time they were trying to work along with spiritualists, and then when they realized that was simply not going to work, they had to make a distinction and separate from them.
The author was made to hint and point out in the true direction, to say what things are not, but not what they are. Now, the author is clearly HPB, but she's not herself, but
she is the
Moya.
Right, she is the
scribe.
Scribe, exactly. But all of the information came from her master, Moria, KH, and more other people. Olcott describes in his book, Old Diary Leaves, that he could recognize the different personalities who would step into her body, and some of them were very stern and not, no nonsense type of people. Others were a little more easy to communicate with. And
so Isis Unveiled had the intention to divert the spiritualist movement from what they thought they were doing, but yet it wasn't so clear. The author was made to hint and point out in the true direction.
Yes. Isis Unveiled is very hard to read. It's lots and lots of different bits of information and stories and sources. It's not, and they knew that it was not well written. That's why they had been hoping for an opportunity to kind of redeem themselves and do a new version of it. Eventually, that would happen in the form of the Secret Doctrine, and even that is not perfect either.
Funny how the masters need to redeem themselves.
Well, we all do. We all make mistakes, and you can't do anything without making mistakes.
That's true. Despite proofreading, a few real mistakes have crept in, as on page 1, chapter 1, volume 1, where divine essence is made emanating from Adam instead of the reverse.
So on the very first page of this, 700 pages of writing, on the very first page, there's a major error.
Wow,
So
how'd they let that happen?
it's, who knows?
Wow. Once fairly started upon that subject, I will endeavor to explain to you still clearer wherein lies the impossibility. You will thus be answered in regard to both planetary spirits and seance room spirits. Planetary and seance room. Wow.
Yes, so yeah, two extremely different types of spirits.
Definitely. All right, continuing along. So this letter, we're still
It's
deep in this letter.
And yeah, this letter is about 23 handwritten pages, or
Wow.
I'm assuming it was on front and back of each page, but I'm not certain. So a very long letter.
The cycle of intelligent existence commences at the highest world or planet, the term highest meaning here the most spiritually perfect. Evolving from cosmic matter, man first evolves from this matter in its most sublimated state as a perfectly ethereal, not spiritual entity, like a planetary spirit. He is just one step removed from the universal and spiritual world essence, the anima mundi of the Greeks, or that which humanity in its spiritual decadence has degraded into a mythical personal God.
So he's now talking about the very, very beginnings of humanity. Obviously, at a time prior to them even being physical. They're not even physical bodies yet, which can give them the type of vehicle that they need to continue their development. Those physical bodies are still being manufactured, so to speak. So we're talking about the first root race, for example.
Evolving from cosmic matter, the manufacturing process of the physical.
Right, and we all know we're made of stardust, but literally. This is even despite the fact that we have physical stardust in our bodies.
So Carl Sagan was right.
Yes.
Man first evolves from this matter in its most sublimated state as a perfectly ethereal, not spiritual entity like a planetary spirit. He is just one step removed from the universal and spiritual world essence.
One step removed from pure spirit. So this is like the very, very beginning of the descent into matter.
It could be considered the Buddhic, not yet.
It may be. It may be.
So if Atma is pure undifferentiated spirit, the very first sublimated state might be the Buddhic.
It could be, yes.
Sheath, perhaps.
It's
so
one step removed from pure spirit.
From pure spirit. That which humanity in its spiritual decadence has degraded into a mythical personal God. Hence, at that stage, the spirit man is at best an active power and immutable, therefore an unthinkable principle, immutable for the time being. In his subsequent descent, and in proportion to the increase of matter, he will assert more and more his activity. Now the aggregations of the star worlds, including our own planet, inhabited by intelligent beings, may be likened to an orb, or rather an epicycloid formed of rings like a chain, worlds interlinked together, the totality representing an imaginary endless ring or circle.
So what are these cycles he's talking about?
I have no clue. No, I'm just joking.
Wait, did you notice that?
Something happened.
Yeah.
Well,
what the heck?
Glitch in the Matrix?
I think we're in a time warp. All right, you better let them in know it. Let them in on the mystery here.
Should I divulge the secret?
Yes.
Let's see. We had an audio challenge, and so we all of a sudden find ourselves 7 days later, and Here we are re-recording the part that we had the audio challenge with.
The video was perfect, and the audio had a very loud buzz in it for whatever reason. So, yeah, we're re-recording the last part of that video. So, what are these cycles that he's talking about? Later, he actually has DK draw a little chart, just a little handwritten, simple chart.
I wish we could see that.
It's actually in the letter. So you can't see it, but it's nothing special. It's just 7. It's basically the same one that was included in Sinnett's second book. He was already thinking about writing a second book that would have more to do with the teachings that he was beginning to receive. And this is why KH was willing to go into such a detailed description of this process. So he's talking about the evolution of human beings, starting with the very beginning of humanity and detailing these 7 spheres that exist at different levels of manifestation, from the most sublime, the most spiritual, down to the nadir, which is the physical world, the dense physical world that we know so well now. But in the beginning, as he will point out, humans at that point were just one stage removed from absolute spirit. So they knew nothing about what the future was going to be like. In fact, they weren't even thinking beings at that point. They were sentient beings barely. And we will see, he will give a little bit of an explanation of how they descend over huge, huge periods of time. We're talking millions of years, stage by stage, and make the round here to eventually return back to the sublime spiritual stage at which they began. Now, I want to point out one thing. We're not going to go into great detail on the teachings of the Mahatma Letters. That is covered in tremendous detail by other people who have created videos and books, and for 140 years they've been studying and writing about this very thing. What we don't have much of is the process of how an individual becomes aware enough to understand this stuff. In fact, much later, several years later, HPB pointed out that only an initiate, someone who has achieved a quite high level of awareness and enlightenment, can write about these things with any understanding. And that tells me at the same time that you have to also be an initiate to understand it. If you understand it, you can explain it, or at least transmit it or discuss it among other people who have that same level of enlightenment.
That is the criteria of true learning and true understanding. Can you explain it? Can you teach it?
Yes, exactly. And if you can't explain it to someone of the same level of understanding, then you don't have it yet.
That's very interesting. Terry, we might want to explain our concept, or this concept of initiation. That term is applied in different ways in different yogic traditions and spiritual traditions.
Yes.
Should we give a little snippet on that, perhaps?
Yes. In a previous video, I pointed out the term cosmic consciousness, and Taimni, our favorite author, Taimni, discussed what he considered an initiation, and that was when a pupil or aspirant had reached a certain level to where a member of the hierarchy felt that that person might be a candidate for further instruction, they do something which he kind of describes as a touch. They touch his consciousness in such a way, his or hers, in such a way that it makes a jump in consciousness from one level to another. And just like that, they understand things that they were not able to comprehend before and probably hadn't even thought of before. But as I said, it is not permanent. It could last for weeks or months or even years sometimes, depending on the individual. But it gradually recedes, obviously not to the level it started at, but at somewhere in between those two levels.
The actual word initiation, it comes from the root word initiate, to initiate, right, or to start or to begin. How does that relate?
It starts a new phase of development.
Okay. I'd like to make the distinction that in other more exoteric yoga traditions and spiritual traditions, that term is used when a new student is accepted into the tradition. They have been initiated as a new student. There are similarities in those two definitions, but specifically, the teacher or guru will give the student a personal mantra to recite, and they are now in the lineage or in that school of yoga or spirituality. With that initiation, with that receiving of a mantra, there's also the concept of Shaktipat. Shaktipat relates to this idea of touching, but not necessarily a physical touch. The guru or teacher gives energy or gives a boost, right, of prana to the student. So they are very similar.
Here's the distinction.
But they're different in a pretty big way. So yeah, go ahead with the distinction.
It all depends on the level of enlightenment of the initiator. If the this teacher, is just Joe Smith from around the corner, right, you get what you pay for, basically. So, and many times it does require either monetary or other investment of time and who knows what. So that's what it absolutely depends on, is the level of enlightenment of the person who is conferring this initiation. If it's a true initiation, you probably aren't in touch physically with that person.
Right. Speaking of this, the hierarchy of planetary leadership, there are multiple initiations too for our viewers. It's not just a one-time thing. Once you're in, you're in. It's not that. It's a stage of progression of consciousness, and frankly, it's rising up the ranks of spiritual leadership, spiritual adeptship, yes, towards the level of adept. And then there are, of course, many higher levels.
So this is all part of the testing process. When we talk about testing, it's not just a few weeks or months or years. It's lifetimes, lifetimes of testing. You may pass one test and then fail the next one. But the only way you can fail permanently is if you give up entirely. And the person who is motivated by love of humanity will never give up. If he or she fails 1,000 times, 10,000 times, they will never give up.
And even if we give up, the next lifetime we may decide to walk the path again.
That's exactly right.
So permanent, it doesn't actually mean permanent.
No. No. It's never permanent.
So picking up where we left off, the progress of man throughout the whole, from its starting point to its closing point.
So from A, they numbered these, or somebody numbered them, A through G. Originally they were A through Z, I think it was, but then they decided A through G would be better. So that's the numbering.
Now, when we say starting point to closing point, this is the cycle of all of the billions of human souls that are associated with our system, correct?
Yes.
And linking this concept back to what we were just saying, if there's a failure or if we choose to give up, at some point closer to the perhaps end, every single human soul is going to succeed.
Right.
It's just the way it works. Every soul will become enlightened.
And it becomes easier and easier. We're the ones who are becoming enlightened today, who are finishing this process, are way, way, way in advance of everyone else.
Right. The majority of human beings are not. And that's why we're nowhere near the Satya Yuga in the Yuga cycle. Satya Yuga is like the age of enlightenment, but the grand age, not just like the 16 and 1700s when Bach and Mozart were writing symphonies. It's when every soul is becoming enlightened. Is it safe to say that?
Yes. We have more than 400,000 years just in the Kali Yuga. We only entered the Kali Yuga 5,000 years ago.
The bottom of the cycle, where we're the most materialistic, the most egoic, the most combative.
So
separate.
we have, give or take a year or two, 427,000 years to go before that cycle ends.
That the Kali Yuga. Then we have
Kali
Dwapara
Yuga.
and then
Yes.
Satya.
So the main point to realize is that it starts at the very top of spirituality, one tiny step removed from pure spirit. And over time, millions of years, reaches the point where we are today in dense physical bodies, and then slowly begin the return to where we started at that same level, just below pure spirit.
So again, the progress of man throughout the whole, from its starting point to its closing point, meeting on the highest point of its circumference, is what we call the Maha Yuga, or Great Cycle, whose head is lost in a crown of absolute spirit, and its lowest point of circumference in absolute matter, which Terry said we are in now, the Nadir, or the Kali Yuga, at the bottom. Absolute physical matter. We believe we are separate from each other. If using a more familiar term, we call the Great Cycle the macrocosm and its component parts, or the interlinked star worlds, or solar systems perhaps, microcosms. So interesting. So we're thinking of a solar system, a microcosm of the macro, but what about within the solar system? How many more hundreds or thousands of microcosms are within the solar system?
Right.
Even inside our bodies, the atoms,
the Kabbalistic saying, as above, so below. And they point out again and again, there's nothing new under the sun. Lower cycle is nothing but a replication of a larger cycle.
like a fractal. The occultists' meaning in representing each of the latter, which would be microcosms, as perfect copies of the former, as Terry just said, will become evident. The great is the prototype of the smaller cycles, and as such, each star world has in its turn its own cycle of evolution, which starts with a purer and ends with a grosser or more material nature.
Now here he's kind of interspersing different levels and not always making a distinction. So when he's talking about star worlds, he's talking about one cycle, and yet he just finished talking about another cycle here. So don't get confused into trying to make too much of this. He's talking in really, really broad terms here.
As they descend, each world presents itself naturally more and more shadowy, becoming at the antipodes absolute matter. Propelled by the irresistible cyclic impulse, the planetary spirit has to descend before he can reascend. On his way, he has to pass through the whole ladder of evolution, missing no rung, to halt at every star world as he would at a station, and has to perform in it his own life cycle, returning and reincarnating as many times as he fails to complete his round of life in it, as he dies on it before reaching the age of reason, as correctly stated in Isis Unveiled. After circling, so to say, along the arc of the cycle, circling along and within it, the daily and yearly rotation of the earth is as good an illustration as any. When the spirit man reaches our planet, which is one of the lowest, having lost at every station some of the ethereal and acquired an increase of material nature, both spirit and matter have become pretty much equalized in him. But then he has the earth cycle to perform. And as in the process of involution and evolution downward, matter is ever striving to stifle spirit. Wow. When arrived at the lowest point of his pilgrimage, the once pure planetary spirit will be found to have dwindled to a primitive or primordial man, amidst a nature as primordial, speaking geologically, for physical nature keeps pace with the physiological as well as the spiritual man in her cyclic career. At that point, the great law begins its work of selection. Matter, found entirely divorced from spirit, is thrown over into the still lower worlds, into the sixth gati, or way of rebirth, of the vegetable and mineral worlds, and of the primitive animal forms. From thence, matter that is ground over in the workshop of nature proceeds soulless back towards its mother fount, while the egos, purified of their dross, are enabled to resume their progress once more onward.
Now, when he's talking about egos, he's not yet talking about human egos. He's talking about every single speck of matter having an ego, a spiritual component. So what's going on, as I understand it, is that the gods, whoever's in charge of the evolution of this infant planet, is checking over the building materials, just like a builder would. They reject some as not being acceptable, and then they get used for other purposes, ground up and repurposed. So I think that's what he's referring to.
He does say soulless earlier on.
Yes, but we're still not talking about human souls. Now, here we can interject something. You were talking about the billions of human souls that are part of this process, and there is a finite number of human souls that are connected with this evolutionary cycle, this particular one. It's not unlimited. They don't just keep coming in. That would not make sense. So there are, according to HPB, 60 billion human souls that are making this trajectory, this evolutionary journey. And right now we have more than 8 billion of those in incarnation right now. So obviously, I don't know, 12% maybe, more than 10% of all human souls are in incarnation right now. And as if you believe in reincarnation, they get recycled. We don't just appear once on Earth and once and done. It doesn't work that way.
This is evidence as to why the period of bardo, the period of between death and rebirth, is so long as measured in Earth years. There are way more people that are in that stage of between lives than there are in physical lives.
And we have to wait for just the right circumstances. We reincarnate in groups. Mm-hmm. You don't incarnate with a bunch of strangers every single time. You incarnate with certain people that you have had incarnations with before because you have interconnected karma. Mm-hmm. Every time we do something, we create karma. So you have specific karma with specific souls, mm-hmm. and that has to be worked out.
And that specific type of karma is referred to as prarabdha karma. The circumstances, like Terry said, need to be set for the prarabdha karma, the karmas that you have with your ex-lover that you were arguing with and you never made up with, your ex-employer, the person that you were jealous of. Those people need to be ready to come back to in a certain part of Earth where you're all going to be able to continue working out your stuff, that prarabdha karma. And then as Terry also said, we create new, which is kriyamana karma. The goal is to do what? Is to create less of the new karmas And resolve the old karmas.
The final goal is to eliminate all personal karma. The only karma we want in the end is the so-called good karma that comes from altruistic behavior, pure love of humanity. That's the kind of karma we're looking for. And the only way you can do that is to resolve all of these other types of karma. And it takes a number of lifetimes for that to happen with specific intent. If you're just kind of ambling along and creating more karma, you're actually adding to your total karma. What is it called?
That's the sanchitta,
yes.
Is the total storage that we carry until we can work it out.
And almost all people end up with a larger bag of karma at the end of each lifetime than they started with.
Yes. And considering that the period between lives is so long, it takes many millions of years for this to happen unless we choose to speed it up.
And you can speed it up tremendously. Karma is interesting because you don't have to experience every single action that you created in the past.
It's not exactly an eye for an eye, is it?
No, it's not. In fact, if you, let's say you, over a number of lifetimes, killed 50 people, murdered 50 people, you don't have to be murdered 50 times to pay for that. What you do have to do is learn that lesson that isn't how nature works. That isn't how you're going to become a spiritual being. Once you've learned that lesson, it's learned. And that's what karma is. It's not retribution. It's teaching. Mm-hmm. It's all about getting you back into alignment with nature.
And that's exactly why we and these teachings don't believe that there's a magic way to erase karma. So I'd like our viewers to hear that. There is not a magic way to erase karma. There is not.
Nor would we want it.
Because it would be pointless. We'd go right back out and do the same thing again because we didn't learn the lesson.
Exactly. It's like someone who's been imprisoned and didn't learn anything, said, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. They didn't prove anything. And then they go right back out and do it again. Yeah.
It is here then that the laggard egos perish by the millions. It is the solemn moment of the, quote, survival of the fittest, the annihilation of those unfit. It is but matter, or material man, which is compelled by its own weight to descend to the very bottom of the, quote, circle of necessity, to there assume animal form. As to the winner of that race throughout the worlds, the spiritual ego, he will ascend from star to star, from one world to another, circling onward to re-become the once pure planetary spirit, then higher still to finally reach its first starting point, and from thence to merge into mystery. Wow. No adept has ever penetrated beyond the veil of primitive cosmic matter. The highest, the most perfect vision is limited to the universe of form and matter. So even the adepts don't see beyond the cycle of this life.
No, and that's why we don't know what the ultimate is. They don't know.
But my explanation does not end here. You want to know why it is deemed supremely difficult, if not utterly impossible, for pure disembodied spirits to communicate with men through mediums or phantomosophy. KH made up this word. So now...
So all of this explanation has been for this very purpose. He's explaining why mediums cannot actually communicate with a dead person.
And here we go with his 3 reasons. I say because A, on account of the antagonistic atmospheres respectively surrounding these worlds, and then these worlds meaning the physical world and then the world where the disembodied spirit exists. B, of the entire dissimilarity of physiological and spiritual conditions. And C, because that chain of worlds I have just been telling you about is not only an epicycloid, but an elliptical orbit of existences having as every ellipse not one, but 2 points, 2 foci, which can never approach each other, man being at one focus of it and pure spirit at the other. But there is still another and far mightier impediment, like a rosary composed of white and black beads alternating with each other, so that concatenation of worlds is made up of worlds of causes and worlds of effects, the latter being the direct result of the former. Thus, it becomes evident that every sphere of causes is not only linked with, but separated from its nearest neighbor, the higher sphere of causes, by an impenetrable atmosphere of effects. For one is active and the other passive. The world of causes positive, that of effects negative. This passive resistance can be overcome, but only under conditions of which your most learned spiritualists haven't the faintest idea. It is very difficult to convey my meaning to you at this point. These axiomatical truths being capable of demonstration only to the highest seers, with a capital S. However, it'll give you food for thought, if nothing else. The intermediary spheres, being but the projected shadows of the worlds of causes, are negated by the last. They are the great halting places, the stations at which the new self-conscious egos to be, the self-begotten progeny of the old and disembodied egos of our planet, are gestated. Before the new phoenix, reborn of the ashes of its parent, can soar higher to a better, more spiritual and perfect world, though still a world of matter, it has to pass through the process of a new birth, so to speak. In that land of shadows, the new and yet unconscious ego fetus becomes the victim of the transgressions of its older self, whose karma, merit and demerit, will weave out its future destiny. In that world, my good friend, we find but unconscious, self-acting, ex-human machines, souls in their transition state, whose dormant faculties and individuality lie as a butterfly in its chrysalis, and yet spiritualists would have them talk sense.
So he's discussing, as you know, the state of Bardo, which is not a state, but a transitionary state, and is very appropriate that he describes it as a transformation similar to a chrysalis. When the worm is in a chrysalis, it's in a transformation stage. When the human dies, that individual is in a transition stage and is incapable of communicating, in most cases, with anyone on earth. And as he will point out in a later letter, it is not to their advantage to mess with that process or to say, hey, I need your help. Can you please let me know that you're okay? It is absolutely not helpful to the individual to disturb that state of transition that is going on.
It's an impediment to them. The notions of hells and purgatory, of paradises and resurrections are all caricatured, distorted echoes of the primeval one truth, taught to humanity in the infancy of its races by every first messenger, the planetary spirit previously mentioned, and whose remembrance lingered in the memory of man. These vague memories linger in the form of various myths and legends.
Myths and legends, yes. So, all of our myths and legends are the result of the planetary spirit having incarnated at every level to set the stage. So it is thought that that includes, besides other realms of existence, besides the physical, that it includes all parts of physical manifestation. As we found out, everything has a degree of consciousness, however minute it may be. So it is the planetary spirit's progeny, so to speak. Everything that exists, minerals, plants, animals, human beings, he set the stage by imparting his spiritual DNA, so to speak, into that vehicle for consciousness. Very profound. So one thing I want to point out before we end this session here is that we have one primary goal as aspirants, and that is to come into contact with our own higher self. This is how we learn. This is at that level that we can receive any kind of an inspiration, whether it's from our own higher self or from one of the adepts or one of their pupils. If there's any teaching to take place, almost invariably it takes place on that level of the higher mental plane. And if you have no contact with that, your chances are pretty much nil. So we use meditation in order to accomplish that. Meditation, if you're not practicing it daily or at least several times a week, it's a good idea to start that now and get in the habit of meditating on a regular basis, preferably multiple times a day.
It really is the key to everything here.
It is. As one of our friends likes to say, the answer to everything is meditation.
It might be.
All right, I think that wraps it up for today. What do you think?
That's a lot of stuff.
You think it's enough for people to meditate on for a week?
A decade?
A decade?
Yes, I do.
A few lifetimes? Yeah.
I do.
Anyway, this work it's fun, it's exhausting, it's exhilarating, and all of the above.
Thanks for sticking with us. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.